from trans ally to transphobe. Okay, I want to see what's going on here.
Transphobe. Below high is shaking. Hey, Spurs, it's Jamie. Welcome back to another video of Fast Food Channel. I don't know, but welcome either way. I'm very glad to have you here. And today we are looking at a lovely, not lovely, little article called I Supported Trans Ideology Until I Couldn't Anymore.
Okay.
I feel like this is a very interesting trajectory and not one
I see what's
that
going on. Never mind.
Or heard of before, where people are like, oh, well,
I used to support the trans.
Okay, I thought that this was gonna be an actual video from Jamie where he's like, actually, no, I used to be a transphobe, or I used to be a trans ally, now I am a transphobe. Okay, he got me. He got me with
community, but
he got me with the clickbait.
Too much, you know.
I don't know the direction this one's gonna go in. I've kind of skimmed a little bit of the article, but I wanted to save my reactions and conversations to be very in the moment about it. But I have seen people in the past being like,
oh, well, I supported trans people until they just got a little bit too loud, you know? They were asking for equal rights just too much, and I just couldn't support them anymore.
And it's bullshit. I do think if you have this ally to phobe trajectory, were you ever truly an ally? Did you just get really, really manipulated by bigots? I don't know what's happening. It's very bizarre to me.
It's very bizarre.
So I'd be interested to read the reasoning behind this, and maybe the article isn't as bad as the title sounds, but we'll see.
I hope the video's not as bad as the title sounds for similar reasons.
Trans ally on it. Well, clearly not anymore based on the title. Very interesting.
That was a very interesting choice.
Until mid-January, I was a stalwart advocate of what is commonly referred to as transgender rights. Commonly referred to as transgender rights. We're talking about trans rights. That's what this is about. If you're a trans ally, I would expect you to be a supporter of trans rights. That's all trans people want, is equal rights to cis people. I didn't waver in my belief that trans women are women and trans men are men. The transgender individuals should be granted access to single-sex spaces based on their chosen gender. I'm vibing with how the language has changed, potentially changed, or maybe this is the way the language has always been, but like you can already get this sense. So like all italicized trans women are women and trans men are men, and then one wording trans women and trans men when trans is meant to be a prefix. Transgender is an adjective. Trans women is not a singular word, it's two words. The whole granted access to single-sex spaces based on their chosen, not a choice, and then gender as in like
chosen gender.
Yeah, it's not really a chosen thing. When people are trans, that's just kind of what they are. Like, it's just like you don't choose to be cis. Now, it's hard to understand from the outside looking in. It's a psychological condition. Gender dysphoria, gender euphoria, not vibing with the gender that you were born with. Like, those are all psychological conditions that if you're cis, you might not understand because you've not experienced what it feels like to look in the mirror and see something that is completely incongruent with how you perceive yourself. But, okay.
Gender, don't really believe in that.
Including female changing rooms, homeless shelters, prisons, sexual assault centers, transition houses, etc. And that those who question such beliefs were misguided at best and transphobic bigots at worst. It's a very reasonable summary, aside from a few minor language points that I've already mentioned. But the idea behind trans rights is that trans people would have equal rights in society that cis people get, and would not be discriminated against based on being trans, would be protected against that discrimination, would be able to live and be treated and have respect as who they are, just as cis people get. You don't see somebody being like,
oh no, Dave, we've just decided we're going to call you a woman and you have to use the women's toilet.
That nobody would do that. So why are we doing this to trans people? Why are we saying trans men, no, we've just decided that you're not men, you can't use the men's, and trans women, no, we've decided you're not women, you can't use the women's. That is an opinion that is not based in actual reality. Those people who push back and question and don't believe in trans people having that access and having those rights are misguided at best, transphobic bigots at worst. So has this person become misguided or a bigot?
Let's find out.
Certain aspects of trans activism would occasionally unsettle me, such as self-identification being the primary requirement needed for trans women to compete against female athletes and on women's sports teams, but I pushed those concerns aside. I call bullshit.
I'm not getting sucked into your bullshit right now.
Okay.
I can't actually find any information that would indicate that self-identification is a primary requirement for trans women to compete against women athletes and compete on women's sports teams. If we're talking on an elite...
No, because like the primary requirement that we used to use was that, and I say used to use because I believe thanks to Donald Trump, we actually have changed those parameters a little bit. But it used to effectively be that so long as your testosterone levels were Hold on. There we go. Okay, that's safety. So that invite. There we go. Okay. So for those of you who have not played Classic WoW before, Classic WoW uses something called a layering system. And a layering system means that when, like, let's say you're in the area that I'm in, and it can only physically hold maybe 100 people. So once you get to 100 people, then another layer is created to put more people into that other layer so that the MMORPG can fit more people in it without people screwing up everybody's other quests and shit. Okay, cool. So, I just had the terrifying experience of somebody inviting me to a group after I had cleared a room out, and then that group being on a different layer than me, so I got teleported to their layer, but staying in the same location, which means that all the enemies I had killed were now alive and well around me. So my safe space I had carved out for myself was now an unsafe space. And it's hardcore WoW, so if I die, that's it. Let's see what I've got here. Played. I've got 23 hours on this character. Ooh. Safe spaces? How woke? How woke.
At a professional level, every sports player, trans or not, has certain requirements they need to meet. It has been looked into that trans women who have been on hormones for a certain amount of time do not have an advantage over cis women. And the rest of the time, we're talking about like trans women who play for their local football team with their friends who all really support them being part of that club. And it's just a bit bizarre that transphobes would take it upon themselves to be like,
no, I think this hobby that you do, that all of the women on your team are totally happy and comfortable with and fully support you being there, I don't think you should do that.
It's just very odd. And as soon as people say stuff like
self-identification, a trans woman just needs to come out and say she's a trans woman and then she gets put on a women's team.
That is not how the world works.
No, not really.
People. I think self-ID when it comes to changing birth certificates would be an absolutely wonderful thing. But when it comes to certain levels of competitive sports, nobody can just make a statement and then walk onto the playing field. They'll have to go through certain amounts of checks to make sure it's as fair as possible for everybody, although it's never an equal playing field anyway. But yes, I push those concerns.
The whole thing is that sports is not actually an even playing field. We pretend that it is. We pretend that it is because we all have to have the agreement that it is for what sports is to even function. We have to basically lie to ourselves that people do not get born with genetic predispositions that make it way easier for them to be a player on a sports team. We have to pretend that that's not the case in order to say that everything is always equal in sports. Nobody has height differences in basketball, by the way. That's a spook. That's a spook, actually.
Aside, how big of you. This wasn't worth my attention when transgender individuals were supposedly being discriminated against in so many areas of society. I'd like clarification on the supposedly and
I too would like clarification on the supposedly. What do you mean by supposedly they are being discriminated against? Because last I checked, if a trans person is being told not to go to the right bathroom, right, that's discrimination. Because when we did that shit to black people and said, nope, white, this is the white pissin' hole, that was bad, actually. So, I'm sorry. I don't know, but the supposedly is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Like, just a lot of heavy lifting here.
What makes somebody think it's a supposing and not just like blatant in-your-face facts that trans people get discriminated against in multiple areas of life based on the fact that they are trans. Further, I had repeatedly read that transgender youth had a high risk for suicidal ideation and attempts, so when it came to advocating for transgender people, it was clear to me that time was of the essence. You delay the medically found scientific treatment for certain conditions, you will impact somebody's life. When it comes to gender dysphoria and being trans, you withhold gender-affirming treatment, you will negatively impact somebody's mental health. It has been found time and time again. It is a very robust finding that gender affirming treatment is A, supported by major medical boards, B, is the thing that reduces gender dysphoria. It literally reduces the thing it's meant to help. C, it does greatly improve the well-being of both trans adults and trans youth to have access to this gender affirming care, and there is age appropriate types of gender affirming care depending on whether somebody is a child or a teenager or an adolescent or whatever. Leave that up to the medical professionals. Most of my activism occurred safely behind a keyboard on social media platforms like Twitter.
Then you weren't actually doing activism. So activism is not being on Twitter. You were not a transgender activist if your time spent being a, quote, trans activist was yelling at people on Twitter. That's not activism in general, and it's certainly not trans activism.
In this period, I gained a number of friends and followers, both trans and non, whose similar beliefs in the importance of transgender rights galvanized me further. I discounted those who didn't agree with my belief system, or rather shouted online at them in 280 characters or less. I used my PhD in clinical psychology as a sword, despite the fact my knowledge of the science and psychology of sex and gender was minimal.
So let me get this straight. You had a PhD. And instead of making informative videos or anything, like, instead of reaching people where they are en masse, you instead decided that what you were going to do was yell at people on Twitter. So obviously not Jamie, but the person who's writing this article. So you were one of the most useless kinds of people. Like, that was your claim to fame, being a useless person. That's wild. I would not be saying that with my full chest. I lack that kind of confidence. That is an insane level of confidence.
Most people who disagreed with me were women who repeatedly stated that males could not become female, and that while the rights of every individual in society must be respected and protected, except they don't.
They probably weren't saying that, actually. That sounds like a lie. Like, I'm sorry. That one just sounds like a lie. I'm gonna be completely real with you. I don't usually see people in these conversations saying, well, all the rights of everybody should be respected. Or they'll say that and then they'll add the, the but at the end.
Think that. They don't. It's a fluffy bullshit said as a way to try and polish the turd of their transphobia. They're like, transphobic, transphobic, transphobic. Oh, but everybody deserves respect within society. But that directly goes against literally what you've just said about trans people, which was fully just disrespecting us and saying that we don't deserve equal rights. It doesn't go together. It's like somebody kicking your car door and then being like, oh, but I really think that you deserve to have an undamaged car. But you just kicked it, mate. The rights of one group, trans-identified people. Yeah. Full on, fallen down the... People who say trans-identified, problem. No. Red flag. Trans-identified people cannot be realized at the expense of another, women. But rights are not pie. Trans people having rights do not impede on women's rights. And actually, what we see is stripping back trans rights negatively impacts women. Because when...
Yeah, it turns out, so before Jamie gets to the point here, I'm actually going to go ahead and mention the trend with fascists. Now, this is not me calling everybody a fascist or anything like that. No, I'm just going to mention that, generally speaking, when one group of people starts to lose their rights, all it does is it means that the next group of people are more likely to lose their rights. I feel like Jamie may go into the point where as we strip away rights from one group of people, we do this really dumb thing where there's collateral damage where a bunch of other people end up getting hurt as a result. That's just a prediction. I haven't seen the video, so we'll see what Jamie ends up actually doing. But I think my point, the one that I want to throw out there before I get poisoned by somebody else's opinion, is that when a group loses their rights, it is a signal that it is okay to then strip the next group down the line of their rights. As an easy example, if you start stripping away the rights of black people in the United States, then it becomes easier to strip away the rights for any immigrant in the United States. And then we start having conversations about what makes a person white, and then suddenly the Irish are no longer white again. We're back to that old bullshit once more. That just is what happens. That's what the trends are. Miana says first they came for, etc. Yeah, it's the first they came for speech. And I know that people get really agitated listening to the first they came for speech over and over again, especially since it was in that one issue of the Knuckles the Echidna comic. I'm dead fucking serious. That's a thing Ken Penders wrote. I understand people being upset that they have to see that shit all the time, but don't be upset when people are pointing out real things happening around them. Anyway.
We're putting all of this scrutiny on other people's bodies in society and strangers' presence in certain scenarios. Cis women will get questioned too, and have been questioned and do get questioned, and that has only increased since things like the UK Supreme Court ruling back in April. It is also true that when it comes to bigots and right-wing politics and shitty, arsehole, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, racist men, they do not care about any marginalized group. Trans people are the first on that rung to be shat upon. But I'm telling you, they are moving up the rung, okay?
Okay, actually, you know what? You went exactly where I was gonna go. Once you hit trans people, then the next person in line gets hit. Oh, the trans people can lose their rights? Well, I guess the gay people can lose their right next. Oh, the gay people are losing their rights? I guess women can start to lose their rights. Oh, the women are starting to lose their rights? Well, you see how it goes?
Are you seeing what is happening with immigration right now? Are you seeing what's happening with Stonewall, with B being removed from the Stonewall Monument? Are you seeing that charities and organizations that are being targeted in the name of like transphobia actually also impact cis, lesbian and gay people as well? Are you seeing that the Supreme Court has been asked in America to repeal gay marriage? This is all happening because they've got a foot in the hold by hating on trans people, hating on people of color, and it's just going further and further and further. So women who are transphobic, what are you doing? LGBT plus people who are transphobic, what are you doing? Any marginalized person who is transphobic or bigoted towards another marginalized group, what the hell are you doing?
Honestly, I don't even know what to say to you.
When I asked why I believe trans women were, in fact, women, I asserted that some boys and girls are born in the wrong body and that our brains are gendered, thus trans women had a male body but a woman's brain. Very simplified language that is used to help cis people understand kind of what it feels like to be trans. Be like, born in the wrong body. Just think of being trans as another way of being human. Being a trans man is just another way of being a man, just like being a short man is another way of being a man. Bodies are slightly different. My body as a trans man is not identical to that of a cis man. The body of a short man is not identical to that of a tall man. Fine with some things, like being trans versus being cis, the differences are bigger and have a bigger impact on people's lives, but it does not stop people from being their gender. I don't know why some people want to be so rigid about it. Life is so much more fun. Life is so much richer and more full and happy and fulfilled when you strip back these weird stipulations and expectations that you have of society and have of yourself and have of other people. When asked to elaborate, I pointed to the vague notion of knowing and feeling rather than terms that were rooted in science and could be operationalized. I mean, what is rooted in science is the multiple studies that have found that the brains of trans people, even those pre-hormones, are more in line with their gender identity than their assigned birth sex. Also, the findings that show the gender affirmative approach having a great positive impact on the lives of trans people and their well-being and reducing gender dysphoria, and also the hypotheses that do have support within nature but are impossible to test among humans, because what we do know is that the brain and the genitals develop at different times within the womb during fetal stages, right? And different levels of hormones, or the wrong level of hormones, when one develops over the other, can lead to people being trans. That is the hypothesis. There is evidence that this is potentially how trans people come to be. I feel like as a cis person, it is not your role to be like,
I can explain what it's like to be trans. Let me explain what being transgender means.
I think you can help educate other cis people around you, but really the ultimate proof that trans people exist is that there are trans people in the world. Are you not seeing how hard it is for trans people? And now it might not be very easy to be trans at all in a lot of places, but it's easier than it used to be. And there is access to gender affirming care, at least in some places in the world. There is legal protection, at least in some places in the world. Yet despite the fact that it is and has always been very tricky, both personally and societally and medically speaking, to be trans, there are still trans people, and there always have been trans people. There is literally evidence that there were trans people back in ancient times. Yet, oh no, Karen can't figure it all out with a quick Google search.
Oh, Karen.
When asked to explain further, I resorted to circular reasoning.
I do like that, because like that is the simplest explanation. But I will say, my only pushback to that And I'm not saying that pushback because I disagree. Like, obviously, I care about trans rights. It's been a backbone of my channel for a while now. But, I did the thing where I put the but there. The counter argument that somebody would make to there's a lot of trans people is they're going to fall onto that social contagion shit. They're going to fall into the social contagion shit. And for those who don't know, the social contagion argument, it's a shitty one. And it's a wrong one. It's been debunked countless times. But the social contagion argument is that the reason that there are so many trans people are because they've been influenced by other trans people. Now, there, like with any bit of bullshit, there is a grain of truth to that. People who were already trans, but were wrestling with it or were denying it, it turns out it's way easier for them to come out of their shell and realize they are trans, at least publicly realize they're trans, once they are, you know, in a group of people that is more trans accepting. And people are more trans accepting when you have more trans people for people to see. Turns out familiarity is one of the #1 things that breeds people's ability to tolerate things that they otherwise would find weird or maybe even problematic. There are people who grow up thinking being trans is problematic. So how do you get those people to realize it's not? You can't hit them with facts, data. Nobody fucking read the data to get to their opinion in the first place. But what you can do is you can have friends around them that they care about come out as trans. And suddenly, when you do, once you get to that point, once they have friends that are trans, family members that are trans, etc., it's way easier for them to recognize that it's okay. And the more people that are around them that recognize that it's okay, the more people are going to want to come out as trans. So the element of the social contagion theory that is true is that more trans representation does mean more trans people come out of the woodworks. The part that's false is that social contagion thinks that it is the people being trans around you that cause the transness for other people. But that's not the case. Sylvie Snow says, one of my sisters believed that, despite being a trans supporter. She would go on and on about how trans people didn't exist when I was younger, and I had to explain to her multiple fucking times that they sure as shit did. She just didn't know or encountered them. She would ignore me every time. You know, I feel like there's a chart that we use in situations like this. Let's see here. Let me find the chart. There it is. There it is. Did you know that there were none of those satanic left-handed individuals? When I was growing up, there were none of them. When I was growing up, you didn't have left-handed people. Why would you have left-handed people? That's not what God intended. Anyway, turns out, as soon as we stopped being stupid about being fucking left-handed, around the early 1900s, the number of people that were left-handed magically went up. It's weird, it's wild, it's strange, it's wacky, but it's so goddamn cool. Turns out, when you have more people around you that are willing to be publicly who they are, it leads other people to be okay showing who they are. Wild.
Some men feel like women, and only women can feel like women, therefore some men are women. Well, that is a very weird way to explain it. Like, some men feel like women, because you're literally then describing a trans woman as a man, which automatically puts you on the back foot when trying to explain something, because to the person you're trying to explain it to, you have then framed that woman as a man first and foremost.
Yep, I agree with that. I think the best thing to do is to say, hey, some people wake up in the morning, they look in the mirror, and they see a person of a certain gender. And sometimes the person of a gender that they see is what they expect to see based on what they were born as. So you were born with a PP and the chromosomes that we would normally expect for people with PPs, and you look into the mirror and you see a guy. Okay, cool. If that is perfectly fine by you, then neato. But for some people, they were born with a PP, and they look in the mirror, and they don't see a guy. They just see a girl who's shaped wrong, and they want to be shaped correctly. So they start looking into ways that they can dress, ways that they can change the way their voice sounds, ways that they can take hormones to more accurately shape the person in the mirror to match the person in their mind, which is a universal fucking experience for everybody. Everybody. I promise you. at one point in time, looked in the mirror and said, I do not like what I see. I would like to change it. I wish my hair were longer. I wish my hair were shorter. I wish my eyes were larger. I wish my muscles were bigger. I wish they were smaller. I wish I was rounder. I wish I was thinner. Everybody universally has had that experience. All a trans person has done is they've looked in the mirror, they've had that experience, and they have had one more thing they were uncomfortable with or wanted to change physically about themselves than anybody else. One more thing. It's a universal experience. You just make it additive.
So this is a very bad way of explaining it. And if this is how you kept explaining it in your head, then you were constantly trying to remind yourself,
Oh no, trans women, men. They are men who want to be women.
so
Nope. They are not men who want to be women. They are women who just happen to be born with penises and more facial hair than somebody else, which is, again, one more thing than what a woman born with severe PCOS was born with. Because the hormonal balance of a woman who's born with severe PCOS may actually be such that they just fucking look like a dude. Facial hair and all. If it's okay for a cis woman to get breast implants or breast reductions because it will make her feel better or cuter or whatever, then it's okay for a trans person to get them for literal medical reasons.
it's unsurprising to me that maybe this person who had these feelings all along has ended up where they are now of not being trans supportive. Because if you've always seen like trans women and men who just think they're women, that's not the most trans positive message.
No, it's not. It's poisoning the well, actually. It's entirely poisoning the well. And I'm on board with Jamie on that one. They've poisoned their own well.
Definitely not the way. As a cis person, you should take it upon yourself to explain what being trans is. If somebody tried to explain my transness to somebody else and they were like, oh yeah,
Jamie is a woman who feels like a man.
no, definitely not right. When pushed on the question of how is it possible to feel like a woman, I'd argue that because I felt like a woman, it must be true. Other times I resorted to name calling, labeling women who said trans women were male bigots who were stuck in the 50s and didn't believe in civil rights.
So this person, like I said, was one of the most useless kinds of people. They, instead of trying to educate people, got into fights online because that is a universal thing for many people. You feel way better when you get in a fight with somebody online. Do you know how insane it is that we as a society, as a grouping of people, love fucking fighting each other? We love fucking fighting each other so much that we will use fighting each other as an excuse to not do other more productive things. That's wild to me. And it should be wild to you too.
Well, they are bigots.
That's the name for it.
If all else failed, I'd mention my PhD. I have a question though, because I feel like this gets thrown around a lot, and this person seems to, back in the past, have used their PhD as a weapon against transphobia. However,
Yet it seems like instead of being educated about something and that being what made them a better person, they used their education as a cudgel, which is really stupid. Like, okay, so the best example I can give of this, one of the best examples, Georgia Paytas, who worked for Answers in Genesis, worked with Ken Ham. She got her PhD in biology, in evolutionary theory, solely so that she could use it as a weapon against atheists. She didn't agree with anything that she had studied. She lied on all of her papers and was very public about having done that after she had gotten her PhD, so that she could say, I know more about evolution than you. I have a PhD. By the way, the Earth is 6,000 years old. She quite literally got a PhD as a grift to wield a more effective weapon so that she could continue spouting the lie that the Earth is 6,000 years old. There are people who do that. And this person that you're mentioning, Jamie, seems like they might have had the kind of superiority complex to do just that.
I'd be really interested to know, it sounds like it's a PhD in clinical psychology, so not a research-based PhD. There's so many different areas of psychology and so many different areas that you can get a PhD in. So like my wife Shaba could be like, I have a PhD, therefore listen to me about trans people. Well, she doesn't know a lot about trans people because, you know, she's married to a trans man and has gone out and done her own research and learning and everything. Her PhD doesn't help with that because it is nothing to do with trans people on On the other hand, my PhD was literally into trans development and well-being. So like I could sit here and say, I have a PhD. I'm also trans myself. Therefore, perhaps I would like to explain a little about being trans and the science behind it and how it feels. But you can't just be like,
I have a PhD.
and I feel like maybe somebody who is willing to be like, I'm going to rely on my PhD to get people to listen to me. Perhaps it is in this realm, but if it is, absolutely terrifying that somebody has been sucked into a bigotry rabbit hole so hard that they would go against their literal specialty because
Jesus Christ, yeah.
the facts are all there. You'd have to literally be denying science to do that. I mean, they are denying science, but you'd have to be denying science that you have actually looked into fully. So I'm going to assume this person's PhD isn't specialized into the area of like gender and trans people. Therefore, what good is it? Just asking. Then I would end the conversation as I did not believe I needed to reflect upon this further. After all, I had federal law backing me. Clearly, I was on the right side of history, and so instead of listening, I kept climbing my personal peak, feeling more righteous the higher I went. I mean,
So then, once the wind started shifting in favor of transphobia instead of trans people, you just shifted all of your beliefs alongside those shifting winds. Wild. Absolutely wild. I can't imagine how you became a bigot on the other end of that. Person that Jamie is responding to.
I mean, especially with recent things that are happening, the law doesn't always support what's morally right, what's scientifically right. Honestly, take guns in America. Dangerous, cause so much harm. The world would be a better place if people could not so easily get guns. However, there's a legal right in America for people to own guns. Doesn't make it okay. I'm not going to sit here and go,
Oh no, it's fine because it's law.
no, we can say that some laws are bullshit. But earlier this year, everything changed. In January, information about the alleged misbehavior of a self-declared trans woman, JY, was revealed. Are you telling me that they went from a trans ally to a transphobe because of one assholey trans person? I have a news flash for you. If one shitty person in a group is going to make you turn against that whole group and see that entire
You weren't
group as
actually an
bad,
ally.
you should literally hate everybody. There are shitty people in every community, marginalized or not. There are shitty people everywhere, but they're not the majority. What happens though is the media likes to pluck out bad eggs of the trans community or any marginalized community, bad eggs who are immigrants, bad eggs who are gay, that kind of vibe, and push the narrative that this is normal behavior for that group of people when it isn't. Initially known for filing human rights complaints against 16 Canadian women who decided to wax male genitals, JY was now alleged to have made predatory comments about young girls online. One comment JY allegedly left said, "Every single time I take that ferry, there's field trips with 10 to 12-year-old girls on it. If a girl asks me for a pad or tampon and help on how to use it, if it's her
Oh wait, JY, hold on. We've covered this person before, right? We've covered this person, the tampon obsessed weird fuck? Like that's the person they're talking about, right? I don't remember that person's name. I've memory holed them, but I know who they're talking about because this sounds so familiar. This was the person that like Blair White responded to as well, right?
first time, what do I do? A selfie of JY in the women's washroom, which included girls standing in the background, also began to circulate. I'm not defending somebody being creepy. I'm not going to sit here and be like,
Oh, just because they're identified as trans, it must be fine.
no, absolutely not. If somebody's acting creepy and inappropriate and like a dick, call it out. Call it out on that person. But don't put that behavior on an entire community. Why is there so much information about the behavior of one person? This is irrelevant other than saying this one person is not okay and has done bad things. I don't see what this has to do at all with the trans community as a whole. Understandably outraged, many women and several men tried to discuss their concerns about JY's behavior only to be silenced for referring to JY as male. I mean, even if a person is shitty, that's not an excuse to start misgendering them. Like, I see a lot of people use the excuse of like they don't like Caitlyn Jenner to then start dead naming her and using male pronouns. That's not okay. I don't particularly like Caitlyn Jenner. There are many trans people I don't particularly like. I do not think it's okay to misgender those trans people just because you don't like them or just because they've done a bad thing. That opens the door to saying,
yeah, Blair White did make a video about that person. Do you remember the name?
So not being called out for calling out the bad behavior, but being called out for being transphobic whilst doing so. On Twitter, temporary, up to 7 days, and permanent suspensions were doled out, making it increasingly clear that the transgender umbrella was successfully being used to shut down any discussion of JY's actions. I don't know who this specific person is. So when I'm saying like shitty behavior, bad person. I'm speaking in hypotheticals. If somebody was actually a bad person, is not speaking about the behaviors and the wrongdoing that would have been silenced or aimed to be silenced. It's if people were using it as a way to be incredibly transphobic, because this is what we see. We see one trans person be a bad person, and the amount of hate that is then extrapolated onto the whole community is ridiculous. So if there was a tweet that jumped
as soon, like, this is the reason why you don't just misgender trans people when they do bad things, because you communicate to people that, like, only when you're one of the good ones do you deserve your fucking gender. Like, we don't deperson people when they do bad things. We try to see if they can become better people. We try to reform them. That's what we're supposed to do. Alrighty, Falcon the Fearless says, living in Louisiana, I have come across people in multiple identities that were quite hateful and supported white supremacist groups. The actions of those people don't negate the realities of said identities. Yep. Sylvie says, yeah, but reform is for people who care about helping others. Why would we bother to fucking do that when we can just throw them into a cell and call it a day? It's sarcasm, heavy sarcasm. Yeah, but I feel like that's the way people feel about, you know, anybody who can be considered criminal or criminal adjacent. They just feel like it's best to just throw them all away. You made a mistake. Jail forever. Fuck off and fuck you.
Off by misgendering this individual trans person, saying what they did wrong, and then being really shitty to the whole community because of it, yeah, that should be removed. Speak about what this person has done. Don't speak about it in reference to the whole community. I've seen this happen so many times. I have seen marginalized people get rightfully and appropriately called out for their wrongdoing. So many times, though, I have seen the whole trans community villainized because of the actions of one bad trans person. And that does deserve to be shut down, because you cannot vilify an entire community for the actions of one person. If we did that, every single community would hate each other. Once I became more aware of the policing happening around the supposed misgendering, if people were calling a trans woman a man, that's not supposed misgendering. I began to notice this happening on a broader level. Women were being silenced en masse simply for speaking their truth. Honestly, with the language being used as well, I really question how much of an ally this person was in the first place, that it could take one person being bad and transphobia being shut down on Twitter in light of that for them to go,
oh my god, no, I do not support the trans community anymore.
How strong was your support in the first place? While I remained steadfast in my beliefs that transgender individuals were vulnerable and that women should accommodate them, the situation involving Twitter and JY created a tiny crack in my previously impenetrable armor. It's clearly not
your previously impenetrable armor? The armor where you used your PhD as a weapon because you couldn't see any reality, where everything around you wasn't a fucking nail and you were a hammer? Wild. That feels like the worst type of armor you possibly could have had.
Not impenetrable.
Got you there.
How was it acceptable that those sounding the alarm about egregious actions were the ones being reprimanded? In frustration, I contacted Morgan Ogre, one of the most public faces of the Canadian transgender community and a vice president of the British Columbia NDP, the province's ruling party. Ogre suggested we speak over the phone, an offer I considered quite generous. We spoke for almost an hour and Ogre listened to my concerns, telling me that other women had reached out regarding JY's behaviour as well. Ogre stated that it would be fruitless to bring such concerns to law enforcement unless there was concrete, verifiable evidence to present them with. I was encouraged to find possible sources and get in touch if I found any. Based on our conversation, I felt Ogre was troubled by the accusations that were being made against JY and was taking them seriously. During our call, Ogre mentioned an event that had occurred a few days earlier at the Vancouver Public Library discussing gender identity, ideology, and women's rights. Gender identity, ideology, I think whenever people call anything to do with being trans and like
it's slimed hard in their own body or limbs,
you've automatically lost me, because people who call it that, it's like the same as when people are like,
men who want to be women, trans-identified individuals, transgenderism.
You don't know what you're talking about. While I was not at the presentation and could not comment on what occurred, I was struck by Ogre's description. It was like 1933 Berlin. My husband and children are Jewish, and I couldn't stop thinking about this simile, which struck me as extreme, particularly as it was made by a very public representative of a political party. I think parallels can be drawn if we can see the same patterns happening in politics and the way people speak about things. I think as well it's important to remember that LGBTQ plus people, including trans people, were impacted by World War II and by Nazis, and there have been transphobes more recently try to deny that trans people were impacted. So it's potentially not as extreme as this person thought it was, and especially if they were not present and did not know how things were discussed or the language being used. Somebody who was there has commented saying, there are some comparisons here. It was at that point when I was told challenges and questions about gender identity ideology in defense of women's rights were equal to the lead up towards one of the worst genocides in human history that I had my WTF WTF moment and I began to tip. It was like 1933 Berlin. I think it's a conversation.
You were thinking like Clayface for real? Fair enough. Oh my fucking god, our healer just died. That account just got deleted, dead. Nope, I can't believe that. So, our healer was complaining that the quests we were on was taking too long because we were waiting for enemies to respawn. So they wanted to hop to a different layer. Remember the layer thing I mentioned before? So they successfully got to a different layer, a layer where there was plenty of fucking enemies, and then they died to those enemies. Weird and wild. No fucking patience. None whatsoever. So the healer's dead. The paladin popped into that layer, saw the death, hit their bubble of invincibility, and just deuced out. And then said, hey, I think you should probably Hearthstone out. My guy, no need. I am a night elf. I can stealth. All night elves can stealth. And now I'm no longer part of a group, and I am solo in deep, deep bad territory. Shit. Okay, Jamie, carry it away. We were talking about Berlin?
Control and dictating to people who they are and what they should be and persecuting people based on them not being this ideal standard. And trans people, along with many other people, were very much persecuted back in the 1930s and 40s by Nazis. I can't see where it's
one of the reasons why we point out that some of the first travesties that the Nazi regime managed to do were getting rid of libraries that were dedicated to studying gender and sex. Like, they actively tried to destroy that information. And we see our government doing the same thing. And when we tell our government that they're doing the Nazi thing and that's bad, our government ignores that, probably because they're perfectly happy doing the Nazi thing. Sylvie says that's one reason why I'm scared of playing with randoms in general. Yeah, that was wild. That was wild that happened on the watch of me and everybody else here. Insane. Thank Jesus Christ for Shadow Meld. I am getting a cat with stealth. I am appreciative of having this bird, but this bird is not enough. Not for the bullshit I have been seeing happen. Absolutely not.
Specifically been said that this person was told challenges and questions about gender identity, ideology, and defense of women's rights were equal to the lead up to one of the worst genocides in human history. Like, based on how they've described things, I'm not sure where that fits together. And I clicked on this link. Somebody went to an event, and somebody who's part of that event is a person who advocates for, or at least advocated for, reparative therapy in trans kids, which is basically conversion therapy. I think they've probably understandably come away from that feeling quite horrified that there's people out there trying to limit trans people from living their lives and transitioning and being themselves. And it's very oppressive and it goes against basic human rights. But I still don't see how this has led to like this comparison of like,
oh, because somebody said it felt like 1933 Berlin. Oh, that means that challenging gender identity and being told it's like the Holocaust.
Like, that's a big leap to make. And unless there were things said that haven't been written down here, I'm unsure of how that was gotten to. In the days that followed, I found it more and more difficult to maintain cognitive consistency, a term coined by Leon Festinger in 1957 in his book A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance. The term describes an individual's need to have behaviors match thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs. How could a feminist speaking at a public library about women's rights be compared to the beginning of Hitler's reign? It couldn't be, and more importantly, it shouldn't be. We need to learn from the past though, right? It's really important to see those same patterns happening so that we don't repeat the shit
thank
of
you
the
so much
past.
for
And if somebody who actually attended was like, wow, some of the stuff being said gives me these vibes of this sense of like discrimination and control, and it's a bit uncomfortable. Like, somebody who wasn't even there is now questioning it. And also, you cannot hide your transphobia behind feminism. True feminism is including all women in your feminism. Trans women are women. And just because somebody stands up and goes,
I'm a woman and I'm feminist and I don't like trans people and this is why.
And then they spurt a whole load of bullshit but hide it shit behind,
but I'm a woman and I'm a feminist, so therefore it's okay for me to say this.
does not make it okay for them to say that. You can call somebody out, you can say that somebody's behavior is inappropriate, even if they are also in a marginalized community themselves, and even if they are trying to hide
like Blair
behind
White.
that status, behind the activism in another area to be a bigot towards another group. That doesn't excuse it. Again, rights are not pie. You cannot stand there and go,
I'm a feminist, this is why we shouldn't support trans people, and this is why trans people hurt women's rights.
because trans people and trans rights do not impact women and women.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if I gave all of the rights, like every single right possible to trans women, it wouldn't require stripping any rights away from cis women. Not at all. Because things like, oh, well, what about our right to privacy? Why is it okay to be in a shower where everybody is going to be separating themselves anyway, because that's how group showers work? You don't just go to the group shower and then everybody sees you. Like, no, there's partitions. There's partitions for a reason. You still have privacy. What about the locker room? If you were okay getting undressed in front of a bunch of women, some of which may have been lesbians, may even be butch lesbians, who you did not want to actually, fucking sleep with, how's that any different than being around a trans woman? Like, your worry is that the person's going to be attracted to you and therefore may try to harm you. But the chance of getting in trouble there, I'm sorry, you're looking in the wrong place. You really are. If you're worried about privacy, if you're truly worried about privacy, then you would not be in those public spaces where you could strip yourself down in the first place. I'm sorry. I care about my privacy, and that's why when I go to the gym, if I'm using the shower in the gym, I go behind the shower curtain to do the showering thing and the changing thing. Because I have watched an old man walk out of the shower completely fucking naked in front of everybody, and I do not want to see Raisin Dick again. But I did get to see Raisin Dick that day, and I was not a fan. And if I wanted to not deal with that, the easiest thing in the world to do was to stay behind the fucking curtain. Wild.
Women's rights. So if this is all it took for this person to be like,
Whoa, I am not going to support trans people anymore,
then I do question.
Tal says there are group showers that are just an open room with showers and heads on the wall. Okay. If you're there, then you didn't give a fuck about privacy because you went to a group shower. If you're in a group shower, then you don't care about privacy. You don't get it both ways.
How far they were already tipped on that seesaw towards bigotry in the first place. The fact that we had reached a point where a representative of a political party felt this comparison was acceptable and didn't think saying such a thing would make anyone think twice was telling. More conflicting thoughts followed. Was there any evidence that transgender people were at risk of imminent extermination, similar to vulnerable groups during the Holocaust? No. Again, like LGBTQ plus people were targeted as well. And there are two headlines to cover.
Yeah, that's the thing. So we do a lot of simplification with the Holocaust. And I know why we do it this way. We simplify things because it's easier for us to digest them, it's easier for us to teach them, and with how horrible it was, it's easier for us to cope with the fact that human beings would be willing to even engage in such acts in the first place. We simplify the Holocaust, but the fact of the matter is, the Holocaust did not just affect Jews. When I was in high school, I had a friend named Stoss, and Stoss and I used to get into political arguments all the time. Now, I was much less versed in politics as I am now, and I spoke with a lot more confidence than I probably should have, but it led to our group of like me, him, and my friend Edward as just being known as this debate trio. And whenever the Holocaust came up as a part of conversation, one of the first things that Stoss would remind me of was, hey, by the way, we talk a lot about all of the Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. Do you have any idea how many Slavs were killed in the Holocaust? And the answer for me is always no, because the number that we're given is 6 million, and we almost always contextualize it as the genocide of the Jews. We ignore other people who got genocided. Or who got attacked with an attempted genocide aimed at them as well. We justify that by having a, little aside. We'll talk about the poem, the first they came for the communist thing, but we won't say the word communist because that's a spooky word. We do a whole lot of stuff to avoid talking about everybody else. Like I said, there will be a nod where we go, hey, and the Nazi regime went after the Romani people. And also they went after the gay people. But we're not given further context into that the way we are with Jewish people. And that was a lesson that I got taught in high school by a guy who had a different education from a different country before he came here. The way that that is framed is far different in a country that had losses there because they were local to Germany. Anyway.
In relation to this, so was there any evidence transgender people were at risk of imminent extermination? I feel
so again, genocide is not about imminent extermination. Genocide is about the march towards attempted extermination. Very different.
like that's a very extreme thing. Okay, like
Really, we cannot make this comparison. We cannot draw anything from it unless a group is literally about to be exterminated.
I feel like that's very extreme, and by that point it's way too late.
Yeah, if you're waiting for step 8 of genocide, you've done nothing for steps 1 through 7. Oops. Like, that's just a death knell.
Like, it's perfectly reasonable, in my opinion, to see the warning signs and say, there are some warning signs. They're not saying it's identical. They're not trying to excuse or diminish or do anything about what happened back then in the 1930s and 40s. What they're trying to do is draw a comparison to help us learn from what happened in the past and spot a pattern earlier. Because what's happened is there have been multiple instances of people literally calling for a reduction or eradication in trans people. CPAC speaker calls for eradication of transgenderism and somehow claims he's not calling for elimination of transgender people. There's no separating a ban on transgenderism from an attack on transgender people. They are one and the same, and there's no separation between them. By saying we need to eradicate
How can you eradicate Christianity? Eventually, you will have people who cling on to their beliefs so much that the only way to eradicate Christianity is to eradicate the Christians who adhere to it. When you try to eradicate all of the people who do a thing, you can't just eliminate all of the thoughts. Eventually, there are people who are so steadfast in those thoughts that your only option is eliminate them. Anyway.
Transgenderism, you are saying get rid of trans people. And that's not the only time. Gender critical author Helen Joyce says she wants to reduce number of trans people. Chilling. We have literally had people sit on stage.
How would you reduce the number of trans people? How do you plan on accomplishing that? How would you manage that one? What's the plan there? I would think that reducing the number of trans people, you could maybe do it first by influencing people to suppress whether or not they're trans, but eventually you're gonna run out of people who are willing to do that, and then the only thing you have left is murder.
And stay in public with their full chests.
I don't think there should be as many trans people. I don't think being trans should be a thing.
So just wanted to point that out. Were transgender people as a group more vulnerable than women? I had no evidence to support this claim. Why does it need to be oppression Olympics though? Why do you need evidence to say that trans people are specifically more vulnerable than women for you to support trans people and for you to understand that trans rights are not impacting women's rights? If you did want some evidence for that, which you can literally find in a 30-second Google search, that trans people statistically are more vulnerable than cis women, it's right here. Transgender women and men had higher rates of violent victimization, 86.1 and 107.5 per 1,000 people respectively, than cisgender women and men, 23.7 and
Jamie with the stats! Jamie with the fucking stats!
19.8 per 1,000 people respectively. That means that trans people are 3.5 to 5 times more likely to face violent victimization than cis women. We're not playing oppression Olympics here. I'm not sat here saying that cis women don't deserve protection from violence and discrimination, but if somebody's gonna sit here and say, and try and use as part of their excuse to no longer be a trans ally,
I couldn't see any evidence that trans people as a group were more vulnerable than women.
there is literally evidence right there. While silencing women who say that trans women are not women and trans men are not men a punishment that fits the crime, should referring to a self-identified trans woman as he, even inadvertently, mean that women deserve to have online methods of communication, a vital tool for women, enabling them to participate in both public and private conversations, cut off? No. I'm sorry. Freedom of speech is not freedom of consequence. Just because somebody is a woman, if they are being a bigot and they are causing harm to another person and they are misusing a platform, why should they get away with it just because they're a woman? Feminism is important. Yes. Women deserve equal rights. Yes. yes, we still have a long way to go with this. However, just because one group is marginalized in a certain way does not mean they can go and be shitty to another marginalized group and get away with it. That causes big issues in society. Be transphobic, get called out for it. I don't care who you are. As I began to let such thoughts sink in, I started to open myself up to listening to the women I had previously shut down. Further, I began to actually use my training and did some research. What, the research that meant that you couldn't find the evidence to support the claim that trans people as a
Yeah, I don't think this person actually did research to begin with. So we have this really bad habit as people of like finding ourselves in the default position. And we tend to think that the default position is the good one, whatever the default position happens to be in. So like you grow up in a very, very white neighborhood and your default position may be that like racial homogenization, good, miscegenation, bad. That's your default position. You didn't do any studies to get to there. You didn't do any work to get to it. You defaulted there. And there's plenty of people who default into the right decisions, the right positions, the ones that are morally cogent. That happens. The problem is we are so bad at figuring out if we defaulted into something. We are so bad at that we end up thinking that, for instance, we have a PhD in something that kind of sort of sounds like it cares about trans rights, and therefore we actually have all the correct positions on trans people. And then the minute we do some research, if we happen to go and look at bad sources, because we know that there are bad sources on trans data, like the Cass report, and those sources are being shouted out very loudly by a bunch of people, so those are the first things that we're likely to find. If we happen to go and dig into those sources as hard as we possibly can, we get really, really weird conflicting data. We get stuff that goes up against what we believed, but we didn't reason ourselves into the original position in the first place. So the first bit of information we find that's contradictory looks like it can pull us in the other direction. Even though, if you did some further research, you would find that things like, say, the Cass report were bullshit. I'm assuming that this person was actually doing research into actual things because they had a PhD, so I'm assuming they know how to build a bibliography, at the very least.
Group are more vulnerable than women. Given my years working as a clinical psychologist, I was particularly interested in what was happening in the healthcare community with regard to the gender dysphoric patients. I read the APA 2015 Guidelines for Psychological Practice with Transgender and Gender Nonconforming People and learned that psychologists needed to educate themselves about the many ways that cisgender privilege and anti-trans prejudice may be expressed, including the importance of examining how their language may reinforce the gender binary in overt or subtle and unintentional ways. The guidelines also stated that psychologists may need to provide TGNC, transgender and gender nonconforming people, with information about TGNC identities, offering language to describe the discordance and confusion TGNC people may be experiencing. Okay, I'd like to know where this is going. Next, I turn to the Canadian Medical Association Journal's 2019 Management of Gender Dysphoria in Adolescents in Primary Care. I read, and the more I uncovered, the more appalled I became. According to CMAJ guidelines, despite the fact that the care of transgender youth is still a relatively young field with a limited body of research to inform care, healthcare practitioners were encouraged to engage in affirmative care and avoid influencing the adolescent to move down a path they would not have chosen for themselves. I mean, a very vast amount of medicine is still very young.
Yeah, so for one, yes, a lot of medicine is young, but if we see that it's yielding results that are good, that are not harmful, we tend to lean into those. But also, you know what's wild to me? We care so much about pulling children in a direction that they might not otherwise would have chosen when it comes to gender. But for some reason, you can find 12 billion stories of parents who think it was perfectly okay to do that when it came to things like the child's career path. Like, it's A-okay to yank the child in directions that they didn't want to go in order to potentially course correct them on a career, but it's not okay at all to give them information regarding whether or not they might be trans. Also, how would we even measure that? That's the thing. How would we measure what position the child would have taken on their own gender without influence, without having a goddamn time machine where we could go into an alternate timeline and see what that child would have picked 10 years down the road had we not given them any support? How would you even know?
Trans people have existed for a really long time. And interestingly, we would know a lot more about the gender affirmative approach and trans healthcare and trans people as a whole if Nazis didn't burn all the books back in 1930s. So
Hey, there's that thing I mentioned earlier. Anyway.
just an interesting tidbit. Is it tidbit or titbit? Also, literally all that's being said here is, hey, healthcare practitioners, we don't do conversion therapy on trans people. All you're saying to a child, if they're coming in and they were assigned male at birth and they're like,
I feel more comfortable presenting as a girl, and this is the name I want to go by and the pronouns, and I want to try wearing these types of clothes, and I like playing with these toys.
and a healthcare practitioner goes, okay, we're going to support you in this path that you have taken for yourself, and we are here to see how that progresses for you. What the is wrong with that? Oh my god, you're letting a kid be themselves. What a travesty. Do you know what happens if you don't do that? You have that kid and you're like,
No, you wear these clothes, you play with these toys, you play with the boys, you go by boy pronouns, and that is who you are. No, you cannot grow your hair out. Go.
and what do you end up with? A really miserable kid. Really miserable. And did you know that at a 5-year follow-up, 97.5% of transgender kids and transgender youth still identify as trans 5 years later? So that is a very
Wild. Almost as though when we give the resources to allow people to make those decisions for themselves, it tends to work out pretty fucking well. Weird. Weird and strange and great. Also, this article that Jamie's reading feels really familiar. Like, I feel like I might have seen this article before.
very long phase for a child. And also let's address the fact that the majority of gender affirmative care for children is entirely social. It's entirely just letting them express themselves how they want. Maybe very few of them will get puberty blockers as they reach an age that puberty would be about to start, so from around 12 or 13 years old. That's a lot older than cis kids with precocious puberty get given puberty blockers, but nobody seems to have a problem with that. Further, I learned that clinical practice guidelines recommend hormone suppression for youth with gender dysphoria at pubertal stage Tanner 2, which occurs on average at 10.5 years for girls and 11.5 years for boys. So yeah, on average, and this would be given after the onset of puberty, so not at this age, it would be given after there are clear signs that puberty has begun. The authors indicated that while the current recommended age to commence cross-sex hormones is 16, it could benefit children as young as 13.5 to be placed on hormone treatment. So what they've done is said, we as the medical professionals with the specialist in this area think that 13.5 would be a beneficial age for trans youth to be placed on hormones, seeing as all of their peers will be fully going through puberty by this age, but it's 16 that they can actually get it is the minimum age. This person has a problem with that. As many younger pubertal youth have been living in their affirmed gender for several years, and a prolonged delay of gender affirming hormone therapy could potentially lead to negative mental health outcomes. This recommendation was made despite the author's acknowledgement that at 16, a youth's future fertility could be permanently compromised as a result of hormone treatment, unless they choose to undergo fertility preservation procedures such as sperm or egg harvesting. The authors then admit that very few youth with gender dysphoria opt for fertility preservation procedures, and I wouldn't either. Why are cis people so pressed about trans people's fertility? Why is it given as the
Yeah, that's one of those weird things that I've never quite understood. Why the fuck do we care so much? Hey man, all I'm saying is, if the broad can't be bred anymore, then she ain't good goods anymore. That's what it sounds like to me. Sounds really fucking weird.
the be-all and end-all that you need to have biological kids? There are also many factors, many things that are not being trans that can impact somebody's fertility either in childhood or in adulthood, and nobody has an issue with that. There are so many medical treatments and interventions that can impact fertility at multiple different ages, and this is a could be permanently compromised, not a will definitely be permanently compromised, and they are given an option to preserve that fertility. If this had been given to me, I would not have preserved my fertility, and I would have taken the puberty blockers and the hormones. There is more to life than biological children. We have a lot of people on this planet. I made the decision at 17 because back then it was slightly less known about how just taking testosterone would impact your fertility. Turns out fine. It's fine. They know a lot more now. If you come off testosterone, a majority of people within 6 months would be able to have some kind of fertility treatment, and voila.
Yep, and I think that's going to be where we end that one for now. If you want to see the rest of this, there's another 15 minutes in Jamie's video. Honestly, I like the way Jamie handled this a ton. That paper feels really familiar to me for some reason. And yeah, why do we care about how fertile kids are? Why is that something that we care about? I don't get it. And please don't explain it to me. I wish not to get it. I don't need to know that much about breeding. I'm golden. I am Gucci. Anyway, that's all for that. Sylvie says, I have a breeding kink, but I don't want to get someone pregnant or get myself pregnant. Yeah, I feel you there. Anyway, shit's weird. People are weird. Go support Jamie. Looks like they're doing a good fucking job. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I really could not do any of this without all of you. Those of you watching, and especially those of you who support me on Patreon. I wanted to go ahead and take a minute to thank all of you who do that, because with YouTube being what it is these days, I really cannot do this full time without the support from each and every one of you. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Tales of Atonement, Nixie-chan, Kiri Artemis, Limor Pinku, Love Bunny Games, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Aurora, Leela Ururaka, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. Thank you so very much. But since you're here, why not go ahead and try watching another one? There should be one that's on the screen right now. And if you are a patron of mine, I wanted to go ahead and thank you again for all of your support. There is still a video you could press though, if you'd like. I would appreciate it. Just a little bit.